of it.
Everybody make a note of thematic analysis. Welcome. Okay,
Thank you.
so
Thank you.
thematic analysis, there's actually three different types of thematic analysis. There's coding reliability, which is Boyatsis, which is the second most popular. There's codebook, which is King and Brooks. And then there's Braun and Clarke's reflexive thematic analysis. So 99.9% of the time when people are talking about TA, they're talking about Braun and Clarke's TA. So they mean reflexive thematic analysis. Um, and then fun fact, I might say it wrong out of habit, but her name is actually Brown, even though it is spelled like Braun because she's from New Zealand.
Okay.
Okay, you see the next slide?
Yes, we do.
Yay. Okay, so now that you know there's three types of different TA, for our TA or reflexive TA, depending on who you are and how you want to say it, there's two different like ways that you can use it. So the first way that you can use it is you're using it underneath a larger methodology like phenomenology or autoethnography. And then you can also use it just on its own. So recently I was like, oh, what do I want to do with this research? I'm really interested in studying this and finding patterns. And I was like, I don't really need a larger methodology for this. I'm just going to only use thematic analysis.
Okay.
Then I have the juicy part of for people who aren't going to be into thematic analysis to like not even waste their time.
Mm.
So, the general like quantitative versus qualitative. I talked about it in my textbook, like the science wars that are actually going on. So, like
Mhm.
if you're a quantitative person, you're probably a realist. You're looking for that one singular truth, and that's the point of your research study, and that is incompatible with the whole like the whole idea behind Braun and Clarke's method of reflexive thematic analysis, because you're supposed to be understanding multiple truths or even like partial truths, or situated truths is another way to say it. What
Okay.
context matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Okay. And then feel free to check out the quote at the bottom. And then here I'm just saying that there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. And just in your mind, dissertations, any research project always takes longer than you think it will. But for dissertations, like 7 months is like usually the fast that you can do a TA for your dissertation. But like a shorter project could take like 3 months. Okay, you can still see this words
Yes.
everywhere. Um, I know there's too many words on the screen, and yet I left it. So
Mhm.
this was just me trying to let other people come back to this and be able to like pause and read this and like read it over, because I feel like it's helpful for them to see like this quote in particular of it's better to imagine TA as a method-ish, like a method with a side of methodology, I think is really helpful to come back as you start to learn more about the model. And it's like, okay, now I understand that this isn't as strict as I thought it was. So as a research method, it's not a recipe. So I don't know, I'm going to use like another therapy reference of like solution focused brief therapy. Like, yes, you have the miracle question, which is a little bit formulaic, a lot of bit formulaic, but you don't have to use the miracle question to get goals in SFBT.
Mhm.
And I think it's a similar kind of idea here of yes, you can use it very closely to how Braun and Clarke have done their own studies, but there's also room for a little like freedom and play. And arguably, there's a lot more room for play in this qualitative research method than there are in others. So I think that's all on this slide. Is everything making sense so far?
Yes. Yep,
Promise.
for sure.
Yay. Okay, really proud of myself for finding pictures that move. Does the picture move on your end?
Yes, that's cool. Yes.
Thank you. the really important things are being emphasized.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so there's 6 phases to RTA, which is just how I'm going to shorten it for the sake of my voice. But I kind of like divvied it up into like these 3 steps because your first step is really okay, what's your research question? What's your data set? And then you start familiarizing yourself with the data. And then the next stage is when you're looking for those themes and those sub themes and those larger themes, and you're kind of putting it all together. And then, the last is pretty self explanatory of like when you're actually writing up to go present or hopefully do something with all the months of research that it took for you to develop. So, just really quick overview because all of these steps can get pretty involved, but this is just our brief overview for people who may or may not be interested in TA to figure out if they want to use it. So the first one is familiarizing yourself with the data set. So Braun and Clarke did a study that they talked about in one of their textbooks where they analyzed 187 Facebook posts that were in reference to this television show. It was somewhere abroad that I can't remember, maybe in the UK. And because of that, like people on Facebook were talking about individuals who weren't having children by choice, and
Mhm.
they collected those Facebook posts, and that was like their data set, like printed, highlighted, like put post-its on. That was what they used. So I just wanted to also introduce that as an idea of your data set can be different than just like your participant interviews that you see in 99% of dissertations,
Mm.
but you still can do the interviews. You can do the interviews or use pre-existing data. You just have to be really transparent. I don't know how in depth to be in this video, probably not that in depth, but you just have to be transparent with your inclusion and exclusion criteria for the data. And then
Okay.
coding is the thing that like everybody I think learns in their doc program. Right, Brenda? This is like
Yes,
doc 101
yes, certainly, yes.
of like
It better
suffering
be.
through what coding is and like distinguishing it from, because phases 3 through 5 are all on themes, spoiler alert. And so then there's this big thing of like, well, aren't codes kind of themes too? And so that also gets tricky. And if you think of codes as themes, now we're up to phases 2 through 5, all being about themes. But quickly, the codes are just like the really quick labels that come to mind. Like imagine you just got one of those label makers as like a present and you're like labeling this and that and this and that. And it's just like your first round of things that come up. So you're like not really attached to these labels, even though you're coding everything.
Okay.
So that would be things like married, not married, white versus whatever, or some way of grouping people, grouping topics.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. So, but remember that you're doing this as a social constructionist, allegedly. So you believe in multiple truths and you're really wanting to get away from what they call like a domain summary or a topic summary, or just like the idea of like, oh, there are risks or benefits. Anything like that is a little bit too like reductionist. So
Okay,
you
yeah, so that's kind of judgmental.
Well, everything will be judgmental, but you want to be transparent about your values and beliefs so that you're like properly situated. But
Mhm.
but rather than thinking of it as not being judgmental, thinking of just like I don't want to be a realist or a positivist. You don't want to be a positivist about it. Um,
Okay.
So are we
so
looking at being more fluid? It is what it is type of thing without making something the 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 one reality or the one truth.
exactly.
Okay.
Fluid, and then be transparent of where you're coming from with your tentative truth, which is
Hmm.
why like in phase 3 you're generating the themes based off of those codes, and even those are tentative as
Okay.
well. So it's like it takes a long time before you actually finalize like what your themes are. But think of it in more like broad terms. I was gonna see if I could throw in a Bowenian reference, but I don't know if that would like help students or confuse them more if I start talking about Bowen. So I'm gonna like try to keep pushing through and hopefully everything comes together. Okay, so codes, we just threw out like, think of codes as like baby themes, maybe. You just threw out kind of like the first things that come to mind. And then themes, you're like, I don't know, what could these have in common? I guess this, I guess that, I guess that. And then phase 4 is where you're like, okay, I'm really like thinking about this deeper, right? But the process is reflexive, hence my cute little pencil icon. So you keep going back and you keep thinking of it and you keep like revising. So that's also why they talk about these as like phases rather than steps, because they don't want anything like purely delineated. Similar to What's Your Face with the stages of grief. And they're like, okay, well, we actually like are bad for calling it stages. We probably shouldn't have done that because now people think you like exit one stage and then that's it. Rather than it being this recursive process that's totally not linear. So copy paste the idea to here. And then phase 5 is when like a lot of these epiphanies are going to come into play. So that's when you're really seeing everything like within context and you're actually like telling a story of the themes. And so that's why it goes back a little bit, way back to what Michaela said earlier, where it's like, it's not going to be just a topic summary or a domain summary. It's not like these are good or this is bad or this is a risk or this is a reward or something. It's going to be something maybe I should find an example for you, or will that
I
take
was
too much
about,
time?
yeah, no, I was gonna ask you for an example, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah?
good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just because I did my own like research very recently, like wrote the draft of the article like 2 days ago.
There you go.
So I was just like, oh, maybe I could actually use an example from my write-up here.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Sorry for the dramatic pause.
No, it's fine.
Who doesn't like dramatic pauses?
Right, especially. Okay, here's a good example of how I think like it transitioned. So codes becoming a theme. Some of the codes that I had was like cost is a barrier to mental health, lack of competent mental health providers, stigma as a deterrent for seeking mental health. And those are all of my codes based off of these statements, right? The statements are the data. Words are data. And then I looked through all of those and I was like, I guess that's accessibility and mental health barriers, which is like a little bit too like domain summary-y, right? So we can't just like leave it there, even though you're like, yeah, that is what it is. Okay. So what's the like deeper story that's going on there? And so then I was like, okay, so I'll revise that to gatekeeping mental health. So different, more broad, more depth to it based off of the data than just like, oh, mental health barriers, right? And then I ended up, my last one was like care withheld, because I was trying to figure out what captured like the data and the words of these people from their like personal lived experience. And if you're just kind of like, oh, mental health hard, that's not like really getting into their experience. And so that's why phase 5 has a lot of those aha moments, because it's like stronger. And so I was like, okay, well, this is stronger. This is like system oriented. And there's a little bit of my feminist flair thrown in as well of like care. Thank you for the laugh. I love that. For the care withheld, so that you know it acknowledges more of the like societal component here too. So I'm trying to keep the emotions, I'm trying to keep the politics, and I'm trying to keep like a larger societal scope saying care withheld.
So
that
kind of
make sense?
like the sticking points that you sort of gleaned from all that.
Kind of, but make sure that you want to make it into a story too.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Move on or say more?
Move on.
You
Okay.
can move on.
Okay. And then 6 is, quite self-evident. Oh, you actually write it up. But the interesting part about phase 6 that again I don't want to get too deep into, just a little bit, is that again we have our little recursive pencil icon here. So as you're writing it up, you can have more epiphanies. So I can be writing up phase 6 and like writing my explanation like I just gave to you about why I decided to change from this word to that word to this word or
Mm.
phrase, more words. And then I can like change it through that. And so now suddenly what phase 6 was, which was just writing up and explaining my positionality and everything, has now become 5 again, because I'm like, oh wait, I'm reflecting, I'm having different epiphanies. So that's again like emphasizing the fluidity. And then I had just like a cute little checklist for people. It's like identify your positionality, like make sure you're being reflexive the whole time and like reflective the whole time.
hmm
And Braun and Clarke actually have not like a checklist, but like it's kind of a checklist posted. Not posted, it's in their article that I'll have a reference slide. Anyway, it's actually for reviewers to see like if this is good quality TA or not, and the questions to ask yourself. But just like, all qualitative researchers usually are like best practice is to keep a research journal because of the recursivity. That's the same with this. So
Okay.
one one fun thing that I did for my own research study, which I'm pretty sure is new, is I used Chat GPT as my quote unquote like research journal.
Oh,
Because I would be
interesting.
like, Chat GPT,
Uh-huh.
why did I react this way?
Mhm.
Oh,
um,
cool.
yeah, it was cool. So I don't know. We're living in a whole new world of reflexive
No,
thematic analysis.
it would be very interesting to see where this goes with these new, like with new technology and things like
Mm.
that.
Yeah. And I also wanted to like debunk like part of this article that will hopefully get published is like incorporating AI into it too. And just like really clarifying like this is not cheating. Like this is actually something that you're allowed to do
Mhm.
and encouraged to do because it can help you consider more. So
Yeah.
it just depends on how long it takes though, because sometimes I like ask Chat GPT things and I'm like not good at developing the prompts and I'm like chatty. By the time you answered this one question that I asked like 4 hours ago, I could have like finished everything myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I would
Um,
imagine just doing that helps you to kind of go, oh, yeah, or
right,
no, not at all.
right.
No, it can most
Yes.
definitely, encourage more brainstorming and the development of other ideas. But I think to use it as an assistive tool, it's great. Like,
Yeah.
w- why not?
I
Mm.
support it. I feel like all the people whose dissertations I'm editing for now and we're like talking about this, it's gonna be so different. I think when they see like other people like now are being able to use AI in their dissertations, I feel like they're gonna
Mm.
be like, that's not fair.
Yep, exactly. Because I'm just thinking like, oh Jesus, I could have done some of that.
Right. And so like there is an aspect of that, but if it makes you feel better, it still is a process because Chat GPT is not like where it needs to be. And the whole idea is that you're talking about like yourself and your interpretation of the data because
Yeah.
it's your
Mm.
relationship to it. So Chat GPT tries to be objective, quote unquote. Well, who knows? I don't know how it's programmed. But that seems to be its
Mm.
deal of like this is the objective true answer, and that's not part of again Braun and Clarke's version of reflexive
Mhm.
TA. And they don't even like the language of like themes emerging, which pretty much everyone uses in qualitative research. And then they're like, actually, no, we don't love that because just the word emerging implies a positivist approach. So, like,
Mm.
how did they allegedly
Mm.
emerge? Right. And then they go on a whole thing like, we don't like emerge, we don't like discover. Like, you generated these themes. You interacting with the data allowed you to come to these conclusions. So instead of just being like, here's the data, it's so apparent, don't you think? You just are really like, oh, this is how I got from point A to point B. Here's this really embarrassing entry from my recursive journal that I've been keeping to help you see how I got here, knowing like my beliefs and my values and my worldview and how that's like influenced the research outcomes. Yes, kind of.
No, yes,
Yeah, super.
and I think going back to the chat thing, even let's say some people will say, oh, it's just subjective, but it can still turn to subjective because the person that the researcher is still has their truth and their realities, and depending on how they interpret it, it can be something totally different and
Yes.
change.
Yeah, 100%. And I think thank you for saying that because it's really helpful to emphasize the subjectivity of the whole process. Because I
Mhm.
would hate for the one person in an MFT program who's like
Yeah, no,
the
yeah, be like,
positive realist. Okay,
yes.
so maybe more than that. I'm just surrounded by a lot of qualitative researchers. But yeah,
Mhm.
to come and be like, oh, I'll try this, and then try to present like, see, this is why it's objectively true. And the more
Mhm.
you try to like defend that argument, the more you are like contradicting yourself, like your
Yeah.
actions are
Hmm.
belying what you say that you believe.
Mm.
Yeah.
So hopefully, thanks for hanging out with me. Hopefully that helps people understand what it is and if, they want to play with it and understand it
Mhm.
deeper, or if they're already like, no, I'm a realist and I'm gonna go back to the numbers thing.
Okay. No, but thank
Good
you
luck with
also.
to
This
them.
is
Yeah.
new information, something I learned something new today. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, then you can take the rest of the day off.
Right. Pretty exciting. Actually, my grow therapy popped up and said that too. It was
No.
like, you had your last client of the day, like, or whatever sign off it says, like, enjoy your time off. But okay, thanks for
Okay,
your
thank
questions and
you.
holding me accountable.
All
Bye.
right, thanks. Bye.
Super fun. Bye. Take
Bye.
Bye.